I saw hand-sized curves of red in the corners of the joints of wood. I saw in the mirror a ring of spikes, widely spaced out, pointing towards the center. A white smoke filled the center. When the white smoke filled the room, the red ring of spikes was closed by a further ring. Things began to be blotchy of mixed colors, and at times I heard a rattling sound, sort of southeast and northwest at the other time. And this feeling of the smoke or cloud when it came out took the pleasant warmness that was upon my face and upon my hands, the palms of them anyways, and upon my feet, and it added to that this euphoria that wiped down. It didn't quite fully relieve the first wipe, but then with further, it did. I feel very calm and content. We could look at Volume 2 as a sort of tantra, a redshift, as it were. As we go out, as we identify, divinity goes out to greet us. Not necessarily in a spatial sort of way, but we can think of desire being moved and directed. And this is sort of their version of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which I don't think I've read, and Dan Brown's book, but more than a couple pages of historical or presumed to be historical stuff comes through. There's talk of those extra manuscripts of the Bible that, you know, the different priesthoods, the north and the south and all that mixed together. And there was some of that going on. But this idea that they used different names of God, so therefore they were like different religions, and this became this and that became that. A lot of that turns out not to be so, really. And particularly the stance that some people have taken, like certain passages in the Bible that are Pauline, and certain rabbinical teachings, but Abrahamic religion in its root is not anti-woman or anything. It's not even gendered, really. And therefore, it actually would refer to the gender in a more neutral way. But the Persian influence created what we know as Judaism. And you see parallels of some of these roles being taken on. Joseph and Asenath, Mary Magdalene and Jesus, side notes of Paul and Moses, and we see herein ideas of how some of the miracles could have been trickery, or at least drama. Of course, in the drawing here, we have some indication about what the interior stars are, right? This isn't just a continuation of the first part, but, it continues to advance some of the stuff. It explains how this such and such can be put back into the Rosicrucian idea, how this is really a tantra. You start off with the yoga, and of course, you have a system of meditation and worship and stuff. This volume is a lot more on the mythology and its progression, and you have ideas. It's like, okay, where did some of the ideas come from? It's like, well, it turns out there was more information than, George Fraser or the Jesse Weston's book and some other stuff like that. They also have their idea of the difference between the Aaronic and the Melchizedek priesthood, the Davidic line, or how some of these things, whether they were literal or not, certain events come forward to push the idea along. If Enochian magic was not something of a continuation of development, certainly some of the magical ideas survived that enabled it to be produced and connect to stuff that had been forgotten. Certain movements are necessary to bring things about, and one needs to work out one's own place among the different paths to have one's own path. One needs to do it in a way to be respectful to one's own theology without providing unnecessary offense to others, like they did at one point to the Chassidim who decided to join in their ceremonies and left in the middle. But of course, we know linguistically that there's no biblical rule against saying any divine name except in context of a secular nature. So as long as it's said religiously and with respect, it's considered okay, but they developed this thing where you avoid saying one name, and it's like the rule isn't just one name, actually. From ritual to romance, and linguistically, we can see certain progressions. One of the things that people don't understand about some words in Semitic languages is not only can you use the different deity names as if it's one deity or some monolarity or whatever, are as completely separate entities and all that. Well, that's up to your personal theology for a huge part. A lot of these names don't have to be gendered. And there's also the unity of the different individuals involved, right? That you don't say, oh, it's a different, you never know what's going to be with one prophet and the next. And that's not really true. Certain material, cultural things can have changed. Moses isn't really supported by these people, although I think that they do employ the pseudo-Moses magic. But there's sort of this idea about what's the origin behind these mythologies, right? How do you get in touch with that which connects to such as your birth chart and that which is beyond your birth chart? How do you bring about stuff in your own, how to make, is it, are you going to be vegetarian? Are you not going to be vegetarian? Are you going to be circumcised? Are you not going to be circumcised? Are you going to make it easier to get divorced or harder? There's different arguments that can be made on each of these behalves. What type of sacrifice is a person to be making? Those from the south are supposed to come and judge the Israelites. For some, this is the idea of an Egyptian revival. Also, the Arabians are to the south. There's a lot of interpretations, but this is thought to be as Jesus and Mary in that way of thinking. Of course, this is referred to Baal and Asherah, or Ashtrut. We might also look beyond some of this to the Phoenician origins in the Hyperborean people, the Phoenicians that rode down and sailed off from Kiev in Ukraine. And then the alphabet became more square and stuff. Should we focus on positive or negative commandments? There's a lot worked out here. I do say that there never was one Judaism. When you had that flux of the Persian priesthood influence into the Holy Land, it, through force and otherwise, it led to a lot of changes. And so when you did have something that, okay, this is Judaism, it took a while for them to kind of put that down, but I do think by about 540, you could say that there would have been what you call Judaism, and it would have been found to just slip on to the forms of other cults that were going on, both the Persian and the Northern Semitic stuff that had been going on for thousands of years, really. And of course, one of the things about the Melchizedek priesthood is it gives a form for rulership both of this world and the spiritual order.